Welcome to Witchpolice Radio. One of the things that I've noticed about doing this show kind of via Zoom instead of doing it in person like I used to is that I feel like I've expanded a little bit more in terms of the type of artist I'm talking to. The show has always been as diverse as I can make it, but there's certain genres that tend to get a lot of focus just because it's what I mainly listen to. I mean, there's a lot of punk rock, a lot of hip hop, a lot of jazz, things like that. And I know there's so much more than that happening, in Manitoba and across Canada. And I think the guests on this episode are doing something that is fairly unique as far as the type of stuff that I talk about. So I'm excited to have you on here. And I think that the best way to start this off is if the two of you just want to introduce yourselves and maybe give a bit of background about what it is that you do, because it's outside of my comfort zone.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. So we're Jane and Kyle, Jane Corey and Kyle Bergout. We're based here in Winnipeg and we both play the fiddle. We both grew up playing classical violin and went to the University of Ottawa together doing that. But we've also both played traditional fiddle music ever since we were kids. And that's really our true musical passion. And so we both do, and as is common with a lot of fiddlers, we do a mixture of performing and recording and a lot of teaching as well, whether it be in the schools or private students, or we also do a lot of online teaching with people from all across the country.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. And so our kind of musical blend has Kyle's grown up in Ottawa and I grew up here in Manitoba. So we both have sort of different fiddle backgrounds, and we've kind of done a little bit of blending in our duo to kind of showcase a bunch of styles that we really enjoy playing.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to ask about too. I had read in your bio and everything that you're from different parts of the country, and I mean Manitoba. Being from here, I know that there's a very strong fiddle sound, especially with the Métis community. And I mean, things like festival and everything, the fiddle is very prominent. And even with just the folk and roots and bluegrass and all these styles of music that are very popular here, the fiddle is a fairly prominent instrument. What is your background, I guess, as far as being from this province, in terms of playing? I mean, I know you mentioned all of the educational side of things, which is of course important, but in terms of what got you into playing fiddle, what was your introduction, I guess, as a Manitoban?
Yeah, I started out with classical through the Suzuki program, and every year the Suzuki program does a workshop weekend, and they had a fiddle class. When I was 7 and I'd been playing for a couple years, I got introduced to that and was immediately really drawn to it. So from there, I joined a little fiddle group on Saturday afternoons and started learning tunes. And yeah, a lot of them were kind of old time based, or a lot of Manitoba tunes and Métis tunes. It was only really when I moved to Ontario for school where I started to get more into Ontario side of fiddling, and there's a big Irish fiddle scene there, which there's also a really big Irish scene in Manitoba as well. So that's kind of what happened for me.
Yeah, and for me, growing up in Ottawa, I mean, I played a lot of what's called the Ottawa Valley style of fiddling, which is really a blend of Irish, Scottish, and French Canadian music from Quebec. So it's really right from the beginning, I was exposed to, I think, a lot of different styles, and something that both of us really enjoy doing is exploring and playing tunes from a variety of traditions rather than just focusing on one alone.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that gives you the versatility too to play in a lot of different settings, right? Because there's fiddle music is connected to so many different cultures and styles, especially in Canada, exactly. Province by province. I'm sure there's something in almost every province where where there's fiddle music involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how long have you been working together with this current project and actually making music together and recording music together?
Well, we first met when it was in 2014 and had sort of right away we started playing together informally at jam sessions and stuff, but it really wasn't until a few years ago that we started actually doing gigs together and arranging and writing music together. And we did our first tour as a duo, I think, in 2019. And then over the course of the pandemic, we recorded our first duo album, which we put out at the end of October.
Yeah. What was that experience like? I mean, the pandemic has obviously affected literally everybody on the planet, and especially for creative people, it's in many cases it's made it very difficult to do things in the traditional way. I mean, even just touring to support an album, or even playing an album release show, has been kind of it's not on the cards for so many people. What was the experience like for the two of you for actually making a record and then being sort of, well, what do we do now?
Yeah, I think it was challenging for sure, especially because the other two guys who are in our band are both based in Ontario.
Okay.
So it it was really hard for us to try and find times to actually get together, and really we didn't end up being able to play all together until we were right in the recording studio. So that was really challenging, but it also, I think, forced Jane and I to step outside of our comfort zone, and we started writing more stuff, just for two fiddles rather than for
Okay.
the full band. And so it definitely had its pros and cons, but it was also took a lot longer to get the album done than we had hoped.
It was a learning curve. I'm sure it was for most artists out there to get motivated when you didn't have any performances to look forward to.
Yeah.
But it's what brings us the most joy is playing music together. So once we finally got back into that groove, it definitely was very helpful during the pandemic to have that to fall back onto.
Well, now that things are opening up a little bit, hopefully, no one really knows, right? But do you have sort of plans on what you want to do now with this record, now that it's been out for a few months in this weird showless universe?
Yeah, we definitely want to start touring across Canada first and foremost, and really because we did our tour in Ontario, and that's where a lot of our following and friends are. But we also have a lot of friends and family and colleagues in around West Coast and in the Maritimes as well. So we definitely plan to getting across Canada as much as we can with the new album.
Yeah, it was kind of tricky trying to decide when to put the album out, because on one hand we were kind of thinking, well, we should wait until we can do a CD release concert and tour it, but then it got to a certain point where we just really wanted to put out some new music, so we ended up decided to put it out at the end of October, because we're actually playing in Quebec at a fiddle festival there that I'm the co-director of. So we thought it'd be a good opportunity to put it out to the world. And then, we're hoping to do more touring probably in the spring, because traveling in the winter is not a lot of fun around here.
Whether there's a pandemic or not, right? It's still
Exactly.
difficult. Yeah. Well, maybe the fiddle festival side of things. I know reading about you guys, you're both fiddle champions, and I think that's a side of things that doesn't come up a lot in other types of popular music, where there's actual competition as far as playing. So what can you tell me about that world? How do you become a fiddle champion, and what does that entail?
Yeah, it's a really fun world, actually. I mean, sometimes when you think competition, you think a lot of stress and pressure that is not necessary. And some people don't really enjoy it that much, but we've kind of grown up really enjoying going to fiddle contests. It really is, the camaraderie is really amazing, and you end up jamming a lot of the time, with your fellow competitors. And it's also just a great place to kind of get your name out there and have people get to know you as a fiddler. So
Sure.
we both compete at what is called the Canadian Grandmasters Fiddle Competition. I started competing what you do is you showcase your province. So they invite a few players from each province to represent. So I started competing there when I was 15. Kyle, growing up in Ontario, it's a lot more densely packed with amazing fiddlers. So he started a little bit later. And I guess becoming a fiddle champion, it's something that eventually just kind of happened to me, and Kyle's been the runner-up there at the Canadian Grandmasters Fiddle Competition. And it's an exciting title to kind of own, even though some people don't really know what it means.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does it take a lot of time away from what you would otherwise be doing musically? Like, I imagine there's at least a certain degree of preparation for that and getting ready to compete.
Yeah, it's very different from preparing for a full show, because for the most part at these contests you have 4 or 5 minutes to play usually 3 or 4 tunes, and that's it. So it's a really, really short amount of time, and you really got to pack as much as you can into those few minutes and make sure that everything is as perfect as it can be. But yeah, like Jane was saying, I think a huge part of the contest is really just the community around it, and getting to play with and meet so many other musicians through that. But I mean, of course, they are still competitions, and so
it's what you make it too. I mean,
Yeah.
I think some fiddlers do choose to spend the whole time practicing backstage and put a lot of pressure on it. So we've tried over time, though it's not always easy, to just remember that these contests are super subjective. A lot of the time it's just what kind of style they enjoy. So
Sure.
at the end of the day, you can't put too much thought into it.
Well, and I guess like what you were saying too about making the connections and meeting people there and connecting with other musicians, that's got to help in the long run too, as far as, when you're going out and touring, you have all these people in this province and this province that you can kind of contact about getting shows or things like that, right?
Exactly. Some of our favorite people in the fiddle community we've met at contests.
When it comes to fiddle music, this is probably just my uneducated impression, but I associate it with folk music, and I also associate it with kind of very much traditional, like you're saying, the Métis stuff, the Irish, Scottish, French Canadian. What is the sort of I don't know how to word this question, but I mean, I know that's there. The traditional cultural stuff is very, very strongly embedded. But what about sort of where's the fiddle going, I guess, in the future? I'm sure there are people who out there who I'm unaware of who are doing very progressive kind of new stuff with that instrument. And I think for a lot of people, and I'm a great example of it, it's definitely associated with kind of old and traditional. And I imagine that there's a whole world out there of people doing interesting, more modern sounds on the fiddles. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing with fiddle music, or really with any traditional music, because of course a huge part of it is preserving the tradition, but at the same time, especially when you're making a living as a musician, you have to develop your own sound and musical identity. So, and there's such a wide range. There'll be some people who only play like really, really old traditional tunes, and then there'd be some groups who are really pushing the boundaries and playing like all modern tunes and introducing like instruments you'd never think of hearing, like a lot of synthesizers and
Right.
electronic music into there. So I think for us, we kind of are somewhere in the middle, because we still, I think, are very much rooted in the tradition, and a big part of what we want to do is to carry on and pass on that tradition. But we also do enjoy writing some of our own tunes and coming up with new arrangements, of course. So it's it can be a tricky thing trying to find a happy medium between the two.
Sure. What is the appeal of the traditional stuff for both of you? I mean, obviously you both grew up doing this, and I'm sure that probably plays a big role. But some of these songs are hundreds of years old, and some of the and you're doing variations on them, and obviously coming up with your own material that relates to it. But why does it still resonate, do you think, in 2021? Some of this music that's goes back, generations and generations.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest reasons for me, at least, is that so all of these old traditional tunes, if you go anywhere, everyone knows them. So it gives you the opportunity. It's really easy to play with other fiddlers and other traditional musicians, because right away you have a lot of tunes and repertoire in common. And I think that's really the main reason. Like when you look at bands touring and recording, it's, I think, very different. But pretty much all of the fiddlers that we know, even if they're really pushing the boundaries and are they still always maintain that core traditional repertoire, just because it comes up so often, and it's such a great way of connecting with other musicians wherever you go.
Yeah, like anywhere in the world. You said there's a big Irish fiddle scene in Japan, right?
Oh, really?
So if we went to Japan, we would know all the same tunes if you sat around a circle, and you'd be able to connect through a different language.
Yeah, that's cool. It's just, that's really neat, actually. I guess no matter who you're playing with too, there's probably at least a dozen songs that you all know just like from muscle memory at this point, from playing them so many times, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of groups, when they go on tour, or like I've been over to Ireland a few times, it's so great just being able to go into a pub there and sit down and join a traditional session and be able to play with these people you've never met before.
Yeah. And they all recognize the tunes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing feeling.
Just saying that, going to Ireland and stuff, what is the reaction there to someone from Canada playing their music to them? Is there any kind of gatekeeping as far as like, oh, you're not Irish enough to be playing this kind of stuff?
I don't think so. I think I mean, it can be very intimidating going to Ireland and playing Irish music there, because you really want to make sure you do it right. But they really have a great appreciation for anyone who's putting in the time and willing to learn their traditional music, and even for bringing other styles of music, like from Canada. They're really, really interested in that, and the response has always been really good there.
Cool.
Yeah. And like when you competed in Ireland, that was a little bit tougher as he's done the North American, or sorry, what's the name of the
Yeah, so
competition?
I also did a competition in Ireland. And that's a whole nother thing because, of course, in the competitions, the emphasis is definitely on the tradition and being as traditional as you can, so that it gets a little bit trickier and can be a little bit political if you're not from Ireland.
Canadians never won that one yet.
Yeah.
I think a couple Americans have, but it's
Yeah.
very rare to not be Irish.
Yeah. So it'd be a bit different for competitions, but in general, I think people are really curious and interested and open about other styles.
That goes for most cultures. Like, there's a big issue of cultural appropriation these days, and that can be a little bit tricky with when it comes to the Métis style.
Sure.
Not being Métis and playing that music, but I think 98% of people recognize that the most important thing is that we're carrying this amazing culture through. And most Métis tunes actually are actually Scottish in origins. So it's like the whole thing is that everything is carried through so many things that,
Yeah, it's all
that matters is
interconnected,
that
right?
Yeah.
Is there a kind of do you feel the pressure of being true to this kind of stuff? I mean, when you're doing something that is like a Métis tune, for example, it's very specific to a culture, and you as an outsider, even though you've played the instrument your whole life, is there pressure to kind of do it right, to properly respect the song and honor it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's it takes a lot of time and a lot of listening just to be able to play tunes from various traditions is one thing, but be able to play them, stylistically accurately is a whole nother thing. And I think that's something that's really interesting to us because it really takes a lifetime to master even one of them. And so it's
Sure.
It's a lot of fun working on all these different traditions.
Yeah.
This is maybe a weird question, but is there a Canadian accent to fiddle music? Like, is what you do identifiably Canadian to someone who's from Ireland or from even from Quebec? Do you sound Manitoban or do you sound Ontarian in your playing?
That's such an interesting question. I find that often with Manitoba, you can't tell as much. Like when I go to Ontario and hear people from rural Ontario and around the valley, I feel like there's a bit of an accent, and I don't know, you can just kind of tell. Maybe it's different for you being around Manitobans and you're not from there, but I find sometimes it's
a tricky thing because in Canada there's so many like regional styles within it that I think it's challenging to come up with one Canadian sound or Canadian style. And that's been a challenge even for some of the competitions in Canada that are trying to get people in from all different parts of the country, because it's really not, it's all, you have a few different styles represented. And I guess for us, because we are blending, music from Manitoba and the Ottawa Valley, it is hard to identify for sure, but
like, again, if you go to Cape Breton, it is so obvious that someone is from Cape Breton. They've got the stereotypical accent, and it's just such a distinct style that right away. And whereas with our kind of blend, I find it's not as easy to tell right away.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think styles are the reason I'm asking this, because I'm curious, because obviously 100 years ago the styles would have been more distinct because everyone was in their separate little areas, right? But now that the world has opened up, the internet is connecting everyone can hear music from literally anywhere they want. Do you think that maybe has muted kind of the distinctness of certain areas? Because someone in Manitoba can be hearing music from Ireland, they can be hearing it from Quebec, they can be hearing it from Japan, right? And they can be listening to it as much as if they were listening to someone local. Like, has that changed things at all? The idea that this traditional music is now available to anyone anywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're seeing and it has been a big concern in a lot of places that regional styles are kind of disappearing because of the internet. But I think we're kind of at a point now where people have realized that that's happening. And so they're putting in more effort to try and preserve those regional styles. And I think you're seeing more now that, if someone from Manitoba is learning Cape Breton tunes, they're really putting the extra effort and time to play them like stylistically accurate, because I think before when the internet first became such a big thing for sharing music, people were just so excited about hearing all these different tunes, and so they would learn them and play them in their own style, which is also great. But I think you're seeing more and more people now playing a variety of styles, but really trying to honor each of those traditions still.
And I know for us, it makes it a lot more exciting to have so many styles to choose from. I mean, back in the day, even when I was a kid, and I'm not that old, I didn't have the internet to find out all these tunes. I would just learn mostly Manitoba and old time tunes in person, or I'd go to a fiddle camp, and that'd be as far as I could get. But it's very different now, because at the click of a button, you can find any style you want.
Yeah, and I imagine that helps you too as musicians, because your music can get out there to pretty much anyone who discovers it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so easy.
It's quite a gift.
Yeah, it is.
The internet is such a there's a lot of issues with it, but we're really grateful. Let's be honest.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for people doing anything creative and wanting to get it out there, it has that benefit for sure, despite all the other horrible stuff about it. So if someone is hearing about you for the first time on the show and they want to find out more, they want to hear your record, they want to find out if you're playing shows, this being a podcast, they could listen to it the day it comes out, they could listen to it a year from now, and hopefully by then COVID is not a thing anymore, hopefully, and everyone's touring and everything. So what's the best way to sort of track you down online and hear you and find out what you're up to?
Yeah, so like all fiddlers, we're old school, and we do have a website called janeandkyle.ca, but we also have an Instagram, which is Jane and Kyle Music, right?
Yeah, and our music's out on all the streaming services too, and we also do have lots of physical CDs. It seems like it's becoming less and less common, but
but in our fiddle world, CDs are actually still very popular, and not just elderly people, but younger people still buy CDs. I think you have about 1,000 at home of just fiddle music. And there is something kind of special about holding a signed copy in your hand, and so we're trying to get that out there. And we have a Facebook page as well, Jane and Kyle, and being ampersand Jane and Kyle. And I guess that's all of our platforms, hey? But you can find our music on any streaming service, or on our website, or on Bandcamp.
Cool.
And we're excited for hopefully even a few weeks from now, there will be some planning in the works for 2022. We have a good feeling about the next year, even though it's a little bit treacherous land right now. It's seeming like things are going to be on their way up for sure.
Well, hopefully for everyone that's the case, because I think people are getting tired of not being able to tour or go to shows, or it's frustrating for everyone involved for sure. I'm glad to hear you doing CDs still. Like I'm definitely a Luddite who only listens to physical media, and so I have thousands of CDs as well. Not all fiddle music, of course, but
love it.
So it's always nice to see that still happening. I know things are changing, and kind of the streaming is the way a lot of people are going, but I imagine, like you said, that your genre is something that lends itself to physical media. I found that interviewing country artists and jazz artists as well, those are two genres where physical media is really still huge.
Yeah, and I think for us, it's such a big deal because, especially among other musicians, for the most part, you're not just playing one tune on a track, right? You usually have 2, 3, 4, 5, a whole bunch of different ones. And so if you have a physical copy, you can actually look in the liner notes and read about the tunes and where they come from, which you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So you're seeing people, even if they don't have a CD player, or buying albums just for the liner notes, which I think is really neat.
Which is important when you're playing traditional music or music influenced by traditional music, because people can find the source of it that way.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome.